Our last speaker is Jana Valová. She's the representative of the Czech Republic in the conference. She's a PhD student at the Department of English and American Studies at Masaryk University in Brno in the Czech Republic. Her research interests include historical and New Victorian literature, the portrayal of ostracized characters in the contemporary revisitation of the 19th century, canon formation, adaptations and appropriations of the 19th century, and the postmodern approach to historicity. She has presented her research at various conferences, including the Victorian Popular Fiction Association. And whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this presentation looks at two neo-Victorian novels. Sarah Waters' Tipping the Velvet, which was published in 1998, and Dan Lino and the Limehouse Golem by Peter Ackroyd, which was published in 1994. In both these works, theatre represents a safe space for anyone who diverges from the arbitrary standard. Therefore, it is also an ideal setting for a neo-Victorian novel, exploring the margins of society and the refusal to follow predetermined roles. To start with, Sarah Waters in her neo-Victorian trilogy, which debuted with Tipping the Velvet, portrays women who gradually grow tired of hiding who they are. The main protagonist in Tipping the Velvet is a young woman, Nancy Astley, who undergoes a transformation from an ordinary Victorian girl into an unapologetic transgressor of the oppressive rules during her early adulthood. Nancy belongs in the category Kathleen Wren calls female rogues or gender outlaws, since her portrayal outwardly challenges as well as highlights the limitations placed on women's social, economic, and public roles, while demonstrating how women's lives have been circumscribed by these imposed limitations. Throughout the book, the main character's appearance, interests, and experiences continuously draw attention to the importance of breaking the rules that arguably shouldn't have been imposed on her in the first place. Nancy emphasizes her plainness at the beginning of the novel when she describes herself as a slender, white-faced, unremarkable-looking girl, with her lips continually moving to the words of some street singers or music hall song. Water depicts an ordinary young woman who should not be viewed as someone whose subsequent behavior is deviant. The narrative also immediately points to one of Nancy's most significant passions, the music halls. At first, Nancy enjoys her passive, voyeuristic role in the audience, where she can observe the braver and more outspoken performers. Nevertheless, as the story continues, her need to discover who she truly is and find a place where she can grow and thrive pushes her towards more risky and active roles on the stage. As Rachel Wood observes, the space of the theatre is an iconic one in this novel, acting as a microcosm of a city space that permits Nan's playfulness with identity and her subversive pleasure in passing off a variety of identities. One of these is when Nancy becomes part of a masher act together with her love interest, Kitty Butler. The masher duo dresses in male clothes and sings suggestive songs that entertain the audience. Kitty is also described as someone whose appearance attracts and shocks Nancy, with her short hair, which suggested that women had spent time in hospital or prison or they were mad. But Kitty is described like a very pretty boy, and her otherness intrigues Nancy, who herself is trying to explore her own identity. However, while Kitty limits the male clothes to the stage, Nancy, having experienced a transformation through the male attire, cannot restrict her masculine endeavors the same way. The Victorian music halls are a unique space for the performance, whose transgressions on the stage are welcomed. But as Patricia O'Hara points out, it was crucial to stress the artist's off-stage domesticity and modesty, qualities not in evidence in the performances of women who took center stage in the music hall. Performers such as Kitty and Nancy are allowed to portray the other sphere under the condition that their femininity permeates their lives outside the theatre. Additionally, the publication about theatre and music halls from the Victorian era made sure to divide yet also find ways of reconciling the public male impersonator with the private, essentially feminine woman. Therefore, in Waters's novel, Nancy's self-expression and stage clothing are controlled by the more repressed and cautious Kitty. Nancy is only allowed to wear male clothes that do not cross over from theatricality to authenticity. This is something Nancy also observes when she's dressed in her stage outfit, and she notes that she's clad not exactly as a boy, but rather confusingly as the boy she would have been had she been more of a girl. Nancy is expected to make it clear with her makeup and feminine curves that she's still a woman and not someone who belongs to the male sphere. As a result, the depiction of femininity follows the traditional path in which feminine traits are associated with visible features of the body. Consequently, while with Kitty, Nancy is not to be read as threatening the binary between male and female because she's just temporarily performing masculinity for the audience's entertainment. Furthermore, since Kitty struggles between being true to herself and continuing the Victorian farce, the impersonator is split between her public and private roles, and she's not comfortable with the potentially dissident implications of her and Nan's double act. In the end, Kitty portrays a male entertainer on the stage and also follows the rules pointed out by O'Hara. On the other hand, as Janet King observes, Nancy is a transgressor of gender boundaries, both sexually and professionally, taking on the so-called masculine traits in order to become a new woman. She and the other heroines of the neo-Victorian genre court deviance in order to further their own evolution, ignoring the social imperative of marriage and the evolutionary imperative of maternity. Such different viewpoints signal that the relationship between Nancy and Kitty cannot continue, and their breakup forces Nancy to start over. However, she finds herself in a city that favored sweethearts and gentlemen, a girl in a city where girls walked only to be gazed at. Being a Victorian woman is very limiting, and once walking unchaperoned, Nancy has to face the criticism of her surroundings. This is something Wood also writes about and says that to wander through the streets without purpose is still potentially problematic behavior for a woman, as public visibility is implicitly mapped onto sexual availability. Because of this, Nancy returns to her role of a man that she has performed on the stage. She no longer avoids altogether crossing over to the male sphere because she wants her performance to be convincing. However, the decision to wear male clothes outside the theatre carries with it a considerable danger, since there are no theatrical conventions to delimit the purely imaginary character of the act. On the street, there is no presumption that the act is distinct from a reality. Therefore, Nancy must ensure that she subdues her femininity in order to become a believable man, and her embodiment must fulfill both the perceivable and internalized conditions. By dressing as a man, Nancy unknowingly enters the world of renters. She decides to become one of them, which is a decision influenced by her need to be in control. As a renter, Nancy never reveals her gender. Instead, she plays the part of a male homosexual prostitute. The main heroine compares this impersonation to her career on the stage. However, the one distinction she makes is the lack of an audience, which she regrets at times. And we can also see that in this passage. This creates an interesting contrast between her initial decision to wear male clothes in the street and her new profession. Yet what the main heroine emphasizes is her own agency and control over the situation. She does not want to be gazed upon by those who would deem her as a transgressor. Instead, dressed as a man, Nancy wants her imagined audience to appreciate her transformation as well as her seizure of power. This new role Nancy embarks on brings her back to the music halls as well. These spaces were popular places for prostitutes who would wait outside the halls where they could find new clients. Tracy Davies also points out that during the Victorian era, and especially in the latter part of the 19th century, music halls came under attack due to their association with immoral behavior and the propagation of deviance. Nevertheless, fashionable West End restaurants and music halls considered the presence of appropriately dressed prostitutes to be an asset in advertising the establishment, drawing male clients and increasing legitimate revenues. The main heroine stays outside the theatre space as her performance no longer requires the limited space on the stage. There are also other roles Nancy portrays on her journey to self-discovery. However, all of them are clearly marked by her experiences on the stage. Her formative years can be characterized by performances. First, the ones that allow her to explore her sexuality, and then those that protect her when she feels vulnerable. In the end, Nancy's last portrayal is that of authenticity, learning how to no longer hide who she is. Cheryl Wilson also observes that after Nancy becomes romantically involved with Florence Banner, she's finally able to begin the painful separation of her sexual identity from her music hall performances. Florence doesn't take part in the pretense and role switching that Nancy has previously employed. Therefore, the main heroine finally appears to be en route to an even deeper acceptance of herself and a move away from the performative acts she did to protect herself. The second discussed book, Dan Leno and Limehouse Golem, I'm going to talk about the main heroine, Elizabeth Cree, who also refuses to follow the limiting rules of the era in which she lives. Instead, Elizabeth breaks as many rules and laws as possible in her quest for self-exploration and self-expression. Elizabeth doesn't have a solid family background, so she finds refuge in the music halls. The unique environment that accepts people from various walks of life attracts the main heroine, who is still searching for a place in the world. Coming from a religious background, Elizabeth considers the halls to be an acceptable alternative to going to church. The fact that many of these halls and little theaters were once chapels and churches validates her interest even more. And just like her mother is obsessed with the church, Elizabeth indulges in her love of the performance arts. The main character is able to experience a sense of community after joining the performance. Additionally, she encounters an environment where a woman's voice was always heard, significantly contrasting with the world outside the theatre. Elizabeth's dissatisfaction with her life, as well as her hatred for her abusive mother, are important aspects in the formation of her character. She's motivated to get as far away from her past as possible, and her roles and costumes on the stage aid this transformation. Maureen Moran points out that even during the late Victorian era, identity for many still depended on traditional moral and religious principles and codes of social conduct. What was preferred was conventionality, normalcy, and obedience. However, the outfits Elizabeth puts on offer new possibilities and roles she gladly takes on. Arguably, two of the most important characters Elizabeth performs on the stage are Little Victor's daughter and the older brother. When she steps on the stage, the main heroine is able to undergo a transformation which transcends the reality in which she exists. As she notes in this passage, when she's performing as Little Victor's daughter, it was as if I had some other personality which walked out from my body every time I stood in the glare of the gas. And sometimes she even surprised me. She had her own clothes by now, and as I slowly put them on, she began to appear. Sometimes she was uncontrollable. In the passage, Elizabeth addresses her role of the Little Victor's daughter in the third person because she acknowledges the uniqueness and individuality of each persona she embodies. She enjoys becoming someone else as she can escape the firmly policed boundaries of normal identity with respect to gender and sexuality. Elizabeth starts playing the role of the daughter after killing a fellow performer, Victor, whose advances towards her become excessive. However, the portrayal of an innocent and naive woman, or a girl, eventually bores Elizabeth, who observes that this character was just too sweet, and she longed to kill her off by some violent action. Susanna Onigan notes that what follows is a much more liberating role in which Elizabeth assumes her first transsexual impersonation. The role, called the older brother, makes Elizabeth feel about them all, as she can change herself at will. Additionally, Elizabeth likes the fact that everyone knows she's portraying the part of Little Victor's daughter and the brother. As she notes, I could be a girl, a boy, man, and woman without any shame. The sense of superiority that stems from her dressing up strengthens the argument that crossing from one sphere to another gives Elizabeth more opportunities and she becomes freer. Elizabeth thus outwardly transgresses the public rules within the theatre space, which offers her protection. Benjamin Paul also notes that cross-dressing is a significant motive in neo-Victorian literature, viewed as a means of self-liberation and self-discovery for Victorian women. This is another characteristic move of neo-Victorianism, to subject Victorian certainties to modern scrutiny and to find that in terms of modern identity politics, it is the Victorian orthodoxy that is deviant and the villainous or unspeakable behavior quite natural or explicable. Therefore, as Paul points out, it is the otherness and all the idiosyncrasies of these characters that are celebrated by the modern reader and viewer. Both Waters and Aykroyd dress their heroines in male clothes to showcase the significant transformation that ensues. Elizabeth's change is all the more extreme once she becomes a cross-dressing serial murderer. Nevertheless, this change reflects the neo-Victorian desire to free its characters from 19th century boundaries. Elizabeth moves on from the overlooked marshes where she grows up unnoticed and uncared for to the limelight of the music halls. Unconventional characters are often restricted to the margins. They are scrutinized and judged. However, in Aykroyd's novel, Elizabeth is able to protect her position within society by what Patricia Pullum describes as shape-shifting. Her public roles include an innocent girl and later on a respectable married woman. Unlike Waters' heroine, Nancy Astley, who goes through a series of transformations in order to arrive at an authentic version of herself, Elizabeth parodies the gender divide. The main character consciously mimics weakness and innocence in front of others, despite being capable of caring for herself. She's aware of not fitting into the predetermined mold. Nevertheless, her transgressions are more calculated and thought out. As a result, gender is an act which has been rehearsed by the main heroine. Elizabeth has had years of experience observing the world and learning the customs she's expected to follow. While on the stage, her performance is protected, and her wrongdoings outside the theatre are disguised with the help of costumes and planned acts. Similarly to Nancy, Elizabeth also takes her cross-dressing activities outside the music halls. With that, the protagonist embodies a monster called the Limehouse Golem who, similarly to Jack the Ripper, terrorizes the streets of London. The public murders are the ones Elizabeth commits in male clothes under the guise of the Limehouse Golem, for her pleasure and moral judgment of others, especially women. When she commits her first performative public murder, she notes that it is to mark her entrance upon the stage of the world. This crime moves Elizabeth from the limited private sphere to the public one, allowing her for greater freedom of expression. The numerous characters and roles Elizabeth Cree portrays during her life are significant in discovering herself. When she becomes the murderess or the respectable wife, she achieves more freedom than other women, and she is not restricted by just one of these portrayals. On the contrary, with every new costume change and every new character she introduces, Elizabeth revises her life. When she becomes the Limehouse Golem, she surpasses the description of a man and becomes a creature, a monster, a supernatural being that transcends the limits of gender binaries. Wandering through the dark streets of London, Elizabeth experiences liberating escapes from the restraints of convention. She herself acknowledges this superiority and sees herself as the rightful judge, while she is not the heroine of the Victorian era, but rather a deviant murderess. She does embody the qualities of a neo-Victorian heroine who refuses to be reduced to only the other and the periphery. To conclude, both discussed novels portray female characters who refuse to embody only one role. Nancy's cross-dressing activities Nancy's cross-dressing on stage as a male impersonator and off stage as a male prostitute drives the narrative. Similarly, Elizabeth's switching between various roles makes the novel distinctively neo-Victorian. Both women's path to self-realization is achieved through their love of music halls and performance. While Nancy is viewed as a transgressor of the rules due to her sexuality, Elizabeth becomes a criminal with a warped idea of justice. These novels challenge the limiting depiction of gender as a strict and total binary, and instead, through contesting Victorian certainties, the main characters manage to embody more than just Victorian women. Music halls represent a space where transgressions are allowed and nurtured, while the streets of London present a further challenge to the preconceived notions that started to be questioned by the end of the 19th century. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much for 3 fantastic papers, which dialogued in between them, I think, very well. So do we have any questions from the audience? I do have a question, just to break the ice. You've used various theories, intertextuality, assemblage, representation of the body, but throughout these days, and especially in the first day, there was the term of intermediality, which it was introduced by Caroline. So do you think that the same, and this is a question for the 3 of you, the same things that happen in the relation between intermediality and the study of 19th century theatre, as we can apply intermediality very well in the study of 19th century theatre. Would you think that the same applies to 19th century theatre as being reflected in the non-Victorian novel?
I'm afraid
you were not here on the first day, so these would be more questions for Rosario.
Well, perhaps I understand intermediality as having using different mediums, like for example, digital text plus literary text plus adaptation. I'm not familiar with adaptation studies and intermediality. It might work, but I don't see how the use of the literary representation of the theatre in a text can be understood as intermediality unless it is transformed into another medium, or is transported or transferred to another medium, such as a digital, or such as using the same text, like having a meta-narrative, meta-theatrical structure. I have to read further into that. I'm afraid I'm not that familiar with that, so I can't provide any definite answer to this. I don't know if you want to add anything.
So I've been looking just a little bit into intermediality, but more so I've been looking into adaptations and appropriations and try to find ways of merging these ideas. I think it is, yeah, in neo-Victorian literature, it is a very common thing that we can observe, whether it's a story that's adapted on the screens, and very often even Tipping the Velvet was turned into a TV show, and Dan Leno and Limehouse Golem was turned into a movie several years ago. And it's always interesting to see how these works are portrayed on the screen, and what the in a way, like it might show what the contemporary audience is interested in, because obviously when adapting something that's talking about 19th century for the contemporary audience, we have to pick and choose what they might find to be interesting. I don't know if I'm answering your question. I got lost.
And actually, what I meant by intermediality, and this is something that we were discussing on the first day, is this interrelation of various elements that form spectacle, and that actually, if you do not read all those elements which participate in the creation of a spectacle, you miss the reception of a piece. And that's why I think it is related with this idea of intermediality, but perhaps Caroline can help me here. So, but I was thinking if this is present as well in the new Victorian novel, all these elements that intertwine together to make Victorian or 19th century theatre as relevant as it was in the century.
That's why I was trying to use the whole concept of a network or assemblage, because putting heterogeneous elements all together, which are disparate, provide a different model to the study of obviously a contemporary novel, which has a Victorian setting, but also speaks to our concerns, because as you know, generally known, the neo-Victorian has a double movement, goes back to the past, but it speaks to us today. So that's why having this kind of horizontal and this heterogeneous elements, which you find in the theatre as well, obviously in the drama, in the novel, might help us look into the different genres within the same novel. So this is how I understand that. For me, it might be, you know, nice look into different genres within, or with spectacle and at least in this novel, which is the one I have focused on.
Do we have any questions, any comments? Of course, Kavi.
First, thank all of you. I have a huge reading list now. So I was adding it to my Goodreads list. So thank you for all the suggestions. I want to go back to this idea about assemblage and network, and the horizontal versus hierarchical, which is, I was really interested. And you mentioned a book called The Network Turn. Is the author Nancy Miller? I couldn't read who wrote that book?
It is a collection, a very short book. It's a collection. I can show you the reference if you like. And obviously it applies to the digital turn, and it has to use in digital humanities, but the editors try to make a call for all scholars in the arts and humanities to find collaborative relationships in the horizontal level beyond the digital studies. And it has been a call for papers a few months ago in critical theory, precisely heralding and this kind of a turn. We have had so many terms already. The spatial turn, the spectral turn, that was in the 1990s. So we've been witnessing a series of turns, but obviously we are on the network in many full ways. So and I think, and perhaps it ties in a little bit with the idea of Kate's model, trying to find a different model of looking at things. And that's why I was thinking of Cordelia's and Masaryk not having this hierarchical, you know, controlling relationship with the subjects, but all the time considering ethical responsibility. And I think it brings ethics into the novel, which I think ties in with ethical concerns about Victorian and our Victorian literature, and how the ethics of not only care but ethics of economics. So ethics is a big word, and the network model helps us see care in a more transversal, cross-cultural, level. So I think obviously I couldn't. And I'm sorry, I was, you know, didn't stick to my timekeeping. But obviously, the spectacle, the world of spectacle is fascinating. But I was really intrigued by how an entity is deployed and how she establishes relationships as a mesmerist and with extended family differently. So I think that's why I use this kind of model, which I think is quite useful.
Yes, I'm going to borrow it, so thank you.
Please, it's all for you. Yeah, and I can give you references, so I couldn't just. Yeah,
we've got Ben, Kate, and Caroline.
Yeah, just to touch on intermediality again, and yeah, I'm all for kind of horizontal networks and the networked relationships. In my work on Sherlock Holmes adaptations, that was the only way that I could find to make sense of the multiple relationships. But I'm also very drawn to cyclical relationships, to cycles and recycles, and particularly thinking about Tipping the Velvet, which kind of goes from a neo-Victorian novel that has its basis in historical music hall performance, then becomes adapted for TV, and then becomes adapted to the stage. And so what we're watching then is a theatricalization of something that was originally theatrical, but it's filtered through our subsequent knowledge of the novel, of its cultural impact, of its television impact, and it comes to us, comes back to theatre, but not the same kind of theatre, and so there's a sameness and a difference there. And I just wondered if there, I guess a question for everyone is are there patterns of circularity? Are there cycles that we can discern in the different texts that you've been exploring, between a kind of a return to a starting point, but with a difference?
I have, sorry, because thanks so much, Ben, and I particularly this novel, and Ling has been working a lot on novels about the spectacle, but this idea of recycling or going back with a change, but also having all the multiple temporalities and the multiple texts, it works very nicely with an idea of polytemporality, because it's like having multi-layered, but also both vertical and horizontal structures, and it is, in fact, this idea of recycling, but also for me, I think Sarah Waters' Victorian mode in a trilogy also provides this blueprint for the whole topics to be recycled again and again, don't you think? Mm-hmm. So it's not just the text being about performance, being performed on stage, being also adapted, but also the same text being recycled and used as blueprint and template for other novels, contemporary novelists, on theatre and the world of spectacle. So I think it's adding a further layer into that idea of recycling, don't you think?
Yes. My head is exploding with all the dimensions, and the different axes, yes, and whether recycling is also an assemblage of, you know.
No, we can have a discussion about this later, but yeah.
I just want to add the idea of this recycling and the cycle structure. Well, when we're turning to textuality, it's both intertextual with the Victorian and the neo-Victorian. So it's kind of like a spiral rather than a cycle.
Yeah, great. I like spirals. Thank you. Yeah, that works.
Okay, we've got 2 more questions, and then we'll move on to the break.
That was a wonderful panel. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. And I was just thinking about Lim's work, and is it Jana?
Jana.
You noted that most of the novels were written by women, and I found Peter Ackroyd's book really disturbingly misogynistic. I don't know whether that's just me, but you didn't touch on the Dan Leno figure. And I felt that the portrayal of him in drag was a really misogynistic parody, and that kind of sat really uncomfortable with the idea of Elizabeth Cree as this Saunders Jack Ripper figure. And we found that there was a kind of gratuitously violent undercurrent in the book, which I was deeply uncomfortable with. I just wonder what you think about that.
Actually, I recently was thinking about the reason why the book is called Dan Leno and Limehouse Golem, and not just because in the American version of the book it's called The Trial of Elizabeth Cree. So there's this focus in a way on Dan Leno, but then at least from when I was reading the book, to me, I did pay more attention to Elizabeth and not so much to Dan, because she was the representation of the monsters and the other, while Dan at times seemed like one of the better characters in the novel, because there are not that many positive characters. There are many people who are trying to take advantage of Elizabeth, and Dan is not one of them. So in a way, it's interesting, yes, that his portrayal of women and then the cross-dressing on the stage definitely might be misogynistic at times. But I feel like the character of Dan Leno is one of the better guys in the novel. I don't know. It's just because I was thinking about the men in Elizabeth's life. There is Victor, which she killed because he was trying to take advantage of her. Then there is the stage manager. It's the same thing. She kills him, obviously, because that's what she does. But so many men in Elizabeth's life who only show her that they want to use her, that she's just a body to her. Yeah.
But I kind of felt that with Dan Leno's cross-dressing as a parallel to the female figure, it almost defeminized her. It kind of acted as a way of undermining her as a woman.
Yes.
And I
definitely.
thought that was partly why it was there, because as you say, it's a bit redundant in terms of the plot.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Elizabeth on numerous occasions is described as not necessarily feminine. People point out how strong she is, how big her hands are, and this is something that she doesn't like. She doesn't like people seeing her like that. She wants to be in control. When she wants to be viewed as a man, she wants to be viewed only as a man, and when she's a woman, she only wants to be viewed as feminine. Yeah.
I'm fine to not ask.